I've always been interested in science, and I didn't have a clue in school where I wanted to focus my attention, and whether it was chemistry, physics, biology, what have you. And for me, I found that geology was an all-encompassing science, and certainly that attracted me to from geology into the mining industry, and in particular into hard rock geology and hard rock mining. I would say definitely. We've seen a tremendous change from the traditional male-dominated industry that was also very much dominated by larger global corporations that were multidimensional in terms of base metals, precious metals, etc. And they tended to lead the way in terms of training. And what we found is it was a very traditional way of training people to work in the mining industry. And they did not always think of who else might want to be in the industry. So we had domination of men, and particularly white men, depending on the jurisdiction. Of course, they didn't think that there would be an interest by women to even enter the industry. But what we've seen evolve is technology. Mechanization, automation. We're now into artificial intelligence. We're at a point here where you can be operating remotely from a distance, and that definitely improves health, safety, and it also attracts more people to the industry from broader backgrounds, including gender differences. I would say leave your options open. You never know where your career is going to take you. Try and keep your eyes open and listen and watch for potential different paths that you could take along your career path. If you wanted to be in the mining industry, you could have a computer background. You could have a marketing background. You could have many different types of backgrounds. But the mining industry now, it definitely is global and has an opportunity to attract people with many different skill sets. In terms of attracting talent, that is always a challenge. In fact, this year with the BlackRock letters, more attention to ESG, the talent pipeline definitely is giving us heightened awareness that some of the senior people who have been in the industry for a very long time do not necessarily have successors that will be able to easily move up in organizations. And so that talent pipeline has to become broader, and it can't include just who you see around your office, your table, your company. You have to think about as a corporation where you can bring in people with different resources and talent that would be an addition to your organization. So for a company like Cameco, it means broadening to different genders, bringing in more women. We are one of Canada's largest employers of Indigenous people. And so broadening that scope, going into Indigenous communities and offering opportunities for them to hear about what kind of jobs are available in the organization. There's a lot of reaching out that is done and needs to continuously be done. Succession can be a challenge, and often you have your head down and you're working hard, and you don't necessarily have the time to train. So training is very, very important, and that should be right across the board, not just for health and safety, for example, but it should also include management training, supervisory training, and also training in knowing the roles of those that report to you and those that you report to. Knowing what your supervisor finds important every day helps you to do your role. So in terms of retention, I think training opportunities are very important, and also being able to transfer, if that's possible, into different facets of the organization, or even sideways, to see how your colleagues are doing the same type of role, perhaps in a different country. So that's critical in terms of retaining people. From what I've seen from the companies that I've been working with, it starts at the top. So it definitely is the tone at the top, and it's pushed down throughout the entire organization. If you have someone in a position of authority who thinks it's important and has a passion to broaden and have more diverse skill sets and diversity in terms of type of people, then everyone within the organization understands that that's an important aspect. So for example, at Cameco and Oceana and other companies I've been involved with, it starts at the top, and that's the senior management team, that's the board of directors, and it's pushed down throughout the organization. And when someone who's working, say, on a haul truck knows that at the board level that there are females working there, that can be a role model for them to realize that they belong in the industry, they belong in the company, and there's a role for them, and they're encouraged by the senior levels of management. I would say within the mining sector, it's very similar to other sectors in terms of maternity leave, childcare. Are there two incomes at home? Are there two working parents? And are they dividing their time? Those challenges are right across the board. And for the mining industry, what makes things a little bit more challenging perhaps could be remote locations. If you're in an office setting, that's one thing, and you may have childcare nearby. But in a remote setting, for example, rotating 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, it can be more of a challenge. So if the company understands what you need to do your role, and by that I mean not just the resources to get the job done that day, but what you need in order to focus on the productivity and focus on your work, in order to have some, your mind settled that other things within your life are being taken care of. We use the words work-life balance, and it's really not a balance. It has to be fully integrated. So when an employee comes in, they need to know that their employer understands not only their physical well-being, their mental well-being is also very important. The enablers. Well, as I say, there's some resources that companies are able to provide. For example, childcare, maternity leave, assistance along those lines, recent assistance we've seen with some organizations. They've been able to get governmental assistance, for example, during COVID and the pandemic, if there were layoffs required. But in terms of enablers, there's a number of things that companies can do. And I think the most important thing is to work with the employees to find out what they need and they want. There's two sides of the coin to quotas. My view is that we've been waiting a long time, and it's about time that the industry changed. It is time to make some change. And the only way I see that happening is with quotas. We've had many countries, you mentioned South Africa, putting in quotas, and they've worked, they've become effective. In Canada, we've had a policy called Comply or Explain, and this is a disclosure policy by the securities regulators where companies have to actually disclose how they're in compliance with diversity measures, or if they're not, explain why they're not, and if they're setting targets, why they're not setting targets. That's been going on for years, and we've had minimal change in terms of the numbers of women at board levels, management levels, and within the industry. So my sense is that we do put in quotas. A capital markets modernization report was released earlier this year, and they actually suggested that investors and the stakeholders in capital markets in Canada would be pushing for a 50% quota within the next few years. There's been a number of studies and examining particularly the type of work that different classes of society have been doing. And I think it's a little bit challenging to pigeonhole that women tend to have working roles where they cannot afford not to work. And depending on the role, they may not be compensated with their employer. The mining industry is a little bit different. So the companies that I'm associated with, there have been layoffs, and due to COVID, obviously, quarantines and periods of lockdown. And during those periods of time, majority, up to 75% of salaries were paid, and because the employees were valued, and the message was, we want you back. This is a temporary situation. We want you back, and we don't want you to be penalized because you're not able to work. And that was extremely successful. We're now at a position where basically everyone has come back, and they're quite happy with the way it's worked out. I would say I never had direct mentors, but I was very observant and very curious. And I always wanted to know how the business worked. And I think that was very helpful. When I first started out in the industry, I asked about annual meetings. And annual meetings were something that was an opportunity for shareholders to be able to meet the board, meet management. And oftentimes in those days, it was the only time a shareholder was able to meet with management. And so they went in person to the annual meeting and were able to hear what they had to say. And that really piqued my interest because, of course, today we have regular quarterly calls, and there's many opportunities for shareholders or individuals or employees to reach out to management, from social media through the website to these types of conference calls. But in those days it wasn't. And when I did reach out, I was very surprised at the response, and bar none, everyone was very encouraging. They love the passion that I had for the industry, and they love the fact that I was curious to learn more. And I think that was a key component in terms of helping me to move along in my career. The other component would be, as I mentioned, keep your options open. I think that in 2021, more than any other time, most people's career paths kind of go like a snake. You never go in a straight line, and quite frequently you don't stay with the same company for your entire working career. So in that case, you really do need to be aware of what else is out there, and the only way you can do that is keep your options open, because you never know where they're going to take you. So that certainly helped me in my career. I wish I knew how everything worked. It's amazing how you often just put your head down and do your job, and you assume that your supervisor's watching out for you. You assume that you are a very important cog in this big corporation, and it takes a long time before you realize that oftentimes you're quite insignificant, and management and oftentimes has no idea you exist. So I wish I had lifted my head up a little bit more and did my job, but also had interactions in terms of my colleagues, my supervisor, and not to have been shy to ask more questions, and certainly not be shy about expressing your opinion, because as I said, bar none, everyone I've met loves the passion and curiosity. And I don't know if that's just the mining industry or it happens across other industries. I can't speak to that, but I would say it certainly has been my experience. In order to be a leader, there are certain skills and traits, but I think right across the board, in order to be a leader, you do need to listen. It's not always about you and your opinion and expressing it and having everyone buy into it. Quite often, a leader benefits from listening to ideas from others. And I think that that's quite important, to listen. Also be respectful in terms of your role. Something I heard earlier on, and this doesn't work during COVID, but it was something that I always kept in the back of my mind, is always when you start your day, put yourself in the shoes of the role that you want to have, not necessarily the role that you have. Some people phrase it as dress for the job that you want, but it would be put yourself in the shoes of the person who's doing the job that you would like to be doing in the next few years.